Hello, it's me. Welcome back to another edition of Spooky Story Tuesdays, making sure we've got our sound and visuals and everything on lock. I hope everybody's doing well out there tonight. And it's a difficult week for some people in the museum world right now. So my heart is going out to everybody who is waiting on news or has gotten some news so far about jobs and job prospects and things like that. Tonight's theme, however, for Spooky Story Tuesdays, we're going to keep it light and easy breezy again. We're going to talk about family. So what I mean by family is that we're going to read some stories that were shared with me by family members when I was writing the book, Maryland Ghosts, Paranormal Encounters in the Free State. I gathered some really cool stories from aunts and uncles and my parents, and so I'm excited to share some of those stories with you all. And then, of course, my special guest this evening is Miles. Miles is, of course, the corn snake. You guys remember him. He's got a little heart on top of his head there. And he was our very first snake that we have now in our current brood that we ever adopted. So in a sense, he was our first snake family member as well that we have with us today. So everybody say hi to Miles. Hey, Mikey. Thanks for joining. So let me tell you about our lineup. I'm going to get nostalgic and just do what I usually do and read us one story from the Scary Stories book, because we can't go wrong, even though it's not entirely related to family, but it is one of the stories that, I say this about every story in Scary Stories, but blew my mind when I was a kid. And the other family connection to that story is that it also scared my mom a lot. So I guess, I don't know, I have that association with the story as well. And then from Maryland Ghosts, I'm going to share, it looks like about 4 stories from family. And then I have an excerpt from something called The Haunted Letters, which was a project I worked on with my uncle, where he had sent me a bunch of handwritten letters of his paranormal experiences throughout his life. So I'm just going to read an excerpt from one of those as well. And then we'll read from the book. You might remember this from, I think, the very first or second week, Possessed Possessions. And this is a story called Jonathan's Special Chair. So, of course, it reminds me of my favorite family member, Jonathan. But it also has to do with a sleigh that used to be at this antique store in Havre de Grace, Maryland, close to where I grew up, which is actually where I also purchased this book. So that has a deep nostalgic connection for me as well. So also a word from our sponsors. I do want to remind everybody that some of my other favorite people are also doing awesome Facebook Live sessions right now on Wednesdays. So tomorrow at 6 p.m. you can tune in and see Scott Marcus doing What's Your Ghost Story. That's at facebook.com/What's Your Ghost Story. And that's a great program of, you guessed it, ghost stories. And then on Friday, the folks at Haunted Galena are also telling stories. That's at facebook.com/Haunted Galena. Galena, Illinois is truly one of the coolest places. And also today is the Adler Planetarium's 90th birthday, and I've been working there for 6 years, and I love it. And I wanted to give a shout out that right after this, in fact, at 6:30, and I'll probably go a little bit longer than 6:30, but I'll try not to. On the Science Fridays YouTube channel, there's going to be an Astro Artists Club virtual observing event in virtual celebration of the Adler Planetarium's 90th birthday, since, as you know, we are currently not open. All right, so I did my housekeeping, and let me look at my little notes here. And I think that we are ready to go with our stories. All right, check it out. In the beginning, I was also sharing all of my current reading, but because Amazon and other places have been so slow, after I finished the book about the Dyatlov Pass incident, Dead Mountain, which was excellent, by the way, I actually haven't had any new reading to share with you, but I have been spending a lot of time writing poetry and stories and finishing some projects, and so that has been pleasant. But I'm expecting some new books this week, so I will be able to once again share with you what I'm currently reading. And now in this very moment, I am currently reading the story called The Dream. Whoops, I'll show you the illustration up front. This, of course, made it into the film about the Scary Stories books. And I remember this scaring me and my mom really, really badly when I was a kid / now. All right, The Dream. Lucy Morgan was an artist. She had spent a week painting in a small country town and decided that the next day she would move on. She would go to a village called Kingston. But that night, Lucy Morgan had a strange dream. She dreamed that she was walking up a dark, carved staircase and entered a bedroom. It was an ordinary room except for two things. The carpet was made up of large squares that looked like trap doors, and each of the windows was fastened shut with big nails that stuck up out of the wood. In her dream, Lucy Morgan went to sleep in that bedroom. During the night, a woman with a pale face and black eyes and long black hair came into her room. She leaned over the bed and whispered, "This is an evil place. Flee while you can." When the woman touched her arm to hurry her along, Lucy Morgan awakened from her dream with a shriek. She lay awake the rest of the night, trembling. In the morning, she told her landlady that she had decided not to go to Kingston after all. "I can't tell you why," she said, "but I just can't bring myself to go there." "Then why don't you go to Dorset?" the landlady said. "It's a pretty town, and it isn't too far." So Lucy Morgan went to Dorset. Someone told her she could find a room in a house at the top of the hill. It was a pleasant-looking house, and the landlady there, a plump, motherly woman, was as nice as could be. "Let's look at the room," she said. "I think you will like it." Manners. They walked up a dark carved staircase like the one in Lucy's dream. In these old houses, the staircases are all the same, Lucy thought. But when the landlady opened the door to the bedroom, it was the room in her dream, with the same carpet that looked like trap doors and the same windows fastened with big nails. "This is just a coincidence," Lucy told herself. "How do you like it?" the landlady asked. "I'm not sure," she said. "Well, take your time," the landlady said. "I'll bring up some tea while you think about it." Lucy sat on the bed staring at the trap doors and the big nails. Soon there was a knock on the door. "It's the landlady with tea," she thought. But it wasn't the landlady. It was the woman with the pale face and the black eyes and the long black hair. Lucy Morgan grabbed her things and fled. All right. So now we will launch into the family portion. This snake is very fidgety this evening. All right, so the first story that I'm going to share with you that is within our family theme is going to be called The Devil in Hagerstown. And this was a story my uncle shared with me. So as I said earlier, during the time I was writing the book, Maryland Ghosts, Paranormal Encounters in the Free State, and after, my uncle sent me all of his ghost stories that he had experienced throughout his lifetime in Maryland and beyond, including in Vietnam when he was in the Vietnam War. He sent them all handwritten over the course of many months. It was very cool to have that type of correspondence with people. Most of the correspondence came through on email or Facebook message or phone call. And so this was one of the stories that he sent that happened to him at a home he lived in Hagerstown, in Washington County, for those who are familiar with Maryland. Some people seem to naturally attract spirits and experience paranormal phenomena throughout their lives, including in their own otherwise non-haunted homes. They are what some refer to as haunted people. With the spirit world being full of a range of beings that have positive, benign, or even negative intentions, haunted people never know who or what they will encounter next. I believe that my Uncle Bernie is a haunted person. He sent me many stories for this book, including the following in a handwritten letter. This is one of the very few stories I received that actually involves a hostile entity, one that brought with it a distinct feeling of evil that my uncle truly thought to be a demon or even death itself. And now these are his words. I had been diagnosed with a major immune system breakdown in April 1988 and was so challenged that I was bedridden for almost 7 months. I had 16 doctors working with me. and 12 of them advised me to get my affairs in order, as this year might bring my last Thanksgiving and Christmas. Well, I fired those 12 doctors. Being exposed to Agent Orange in the western mountains of Vietnam for 73 days on a recon mission near the Ho Chi Minh Trail all those years before had finally taken its toll on me. I also became single in October 1988, and at the time of this incident, I was living in a 100-year-old townhome apartment in North Hagerstown. I had taken medical retirement, having been diagnosed with a number of serious illnesses that had contributed to that immune system breakdown, including fibromyalgia. I had and was experiencing an episode of extreme pain and fatigue that lasted over 2 weeks. The time was approximately 3:15 a.m., which is a time that seems many nighttime paranormal experiences occur. Well, that was rude, Miles. Miles is having a ball over here, climbing on his little jungle gym that is me. He just knocked over the raven. It's fine. Sorry, guys. The time was approximately 3:15 a.m., which is a time that seems many nighttime paranormal experiences occur. The 3 a.m. hour is sometimes called the devil's hour. I was in bed trying to sleep, but I could not sleep. I heard the chain on the inside of the back door begin to rattle as if someone was entering my residence. I reached for my revolver. I heard and could almost feel heavy footsteps advancing down my hallway, past my library, and toward my bedroom. Before me appeared a large, black, translucent form, approximately 7 feet tall. My ceilings in that townhouse apartment were about 9 feet tall for reference. I sensed that the form before me was a masculine one, and it was not the first time I had ever sensed it, but it was the first time I had ever seen it. Was it death or the devil that I had before me? My heavy pistol was, of course, no use to me at this moment. I greeted the vision with the verbal demand to leave me and leave my home, for dying was not an option. The black form seemed to change shape as I yelled at him. He wasn't going easily, and neither was I, as I had survived so much already and still had so much to live for. After approximately 10 minutes, I saw my clock. It was 3:25 a.m., and my visitor slowly turned away from me. I could hear his heavy footsteps walking back down the hall. They were so strong, yet it seemed he had been hovering in the doorway with no feet to touch the floor. He entered my kitchen, and I could hear the chain rattle again on the back door as he left. The next thing I recall was the sun coming up. I still had my pistol in hand, and I rose from my bed to reconstruct, at least in my mind, what had occurred only a few hours earlier. I had nice wooden floors and sectional rugs. The rugs had been disturbed as if someone or something had ruffled them up, and a few of my books that had been on the glass coffee table had been knocked to the floor, perhaps due to the vibrations caused by those heavy footsteps. That's just a really cool story, I think. And very brave of my uncle. And I also wanted to remind you all that if you do have any questions about Miles, to ask throughout the program. Miles is probably going to be going back soon because he is like getting wild over here. So the next story I'm going to read is called The Log Cabin. And this happened in Ellicott City, Maryland, to my dad around the time that he was dating my mom. And I will, of course, let the rest of the story tell itself. So, my dad moved into a log cabin on New Cut Road in Ellicott City in the late fall of 1980. He was only 22 and had never left the state, much less been outside of the areas in Baltimore City and Carroll County where he grew up. When his friend Tom offered for him to move out there and work and take classes at the local community college, it was an intimidating, risky, and unprecedented move for him. The cabin had been built sometime in the 1950s and sat atop a hill on 52 acres of forest. It was part of a property that had once been used as some kind of boys' club or summer camp. About 400 yards down the hill from the cabin was an abandoned swimming pool filled in with leaves and debris and an old swing set. There was another empty building nearby that had been used in conjunction with the camp, and the log cabin had been the main meeting point or lodge for the entire campsite. Excuse me, Miles. Excuse me. This guy keeps us on our toes. I think he's ready to go back. Thank you, everybody. This is Jonathan Montgomery Pollock, folks. Thank you. And that was Miles. Miles is a corn snake, and you can see he's a great climber. They can be found sometimes in deep southern Illinois, but mostly they are southern and eastern dwelling snakes. And to answer Colleen's questions, Miles is probably not sorry for knocking the raven over. I bet he had a great time doing it and would knock over more stuff if I gave him the chance, because he was ready to start crawling all over the desk and exploring. All right, sorry, back to the story. So about 400 yards down the hill from the cabin was an abandoned swimming pool, filled in with leaves and debris and an old swing set. There was another empty building nearby that had also been used in conjunction with the camp, and the log cabin had been the main meeting point or lodge for the entire campsite. There were 2 regular residential houses further down the road, built in the early 20th or late 19th century. They were big but fairly dilapidated and were rented out by some young guys as multi-story bachelor pads. Also close by was Taylor Manor, a psychiatric hospital which is now a modernized part of the Shepherd Pratt health system. According to my dad, Taylor Manor was the creepy place in town back then. They were apparently still giving electroshock therapy and other controversial treatments to patients. His roommate Tom had been an orderly at the hospital but quit after 2 weeks because, in my dad's words, it was a horrible and depressing place to be. My dad seems to recall that the property he lived on was also somehow connected to the numerous mental health care facilities in Ellicott City, that maybe the boys' camp was specifically a getaway for troubled youth or young men with disabilities, but he can't confirm that. In any case, once he got settled into living in the cabin, he really liked it. Ellicott City was a cool place to be at the time, and he enjoyed it, but it wasn't easy to get used to the view. All he could see from his cabin during the day was the woods, and at night, blackness. The cabin was large and had a screened-in front porch with a spacious central living room. There were 2 bedrooms on the one side of the living room and a kitchen and bathroom on the other side. There were no curtains on the windows, no carpeting, no amenities, and they had absolutely no money. They had a 13-inch black and white television and a small cassette player. They kept the heat on 50 degrees in winter, and sometimes in the middle of the night my dad would get up and have to throw up in the backyard because he hadn't eaten in days. The cabin had a long driveway that sat at a 45-degree angle and was frozen in the fall and winter, forcing my dad to park at the bottom and walk through the woods to get home. He says there was a 20-foot-long bridge he had to drive over, and then he would park and cross some wooden planks going over a stream and navigate through the trees up to the cabin. If it was nighttime and there was no moonlight, he'd have to feel his way home. It would be so dark that he couldn't see the cabin. For the first 2 months he lived there, he had trouble sleeping because it was so quiet and so utterly dark. His paranormal encounter occurred a few months into living there in the late winter of 1981, around February or March. He was alone in the cabin and in his bedroom studying for one of his classes. He didn't have the television on or any music on. Everything was silent, and suddenly something just didn't feel right. He calmly got up and went to the living room to read, but something still wasn't right. I just had this eerie feeling suddenly, he said. I started to look around the cabin apprehensively. I made a right to go into the kitchen after checking Tom's room. There was a front door in the living room and another door in the kitchen that we never used, with no curtains on the windows. Looking into the kitchen and out into the dark beyond, I felt it. He could see into the bathroom from there as well, and with the bathroom door open, he could see the toilet and the sink. The door was about 3/4 of the way open. He says, I remember standing there thinking suddenly that there was someone behind that door. I wasn't going to walk in to find out. I was scared. I mean scared. I dashed out to my car and left. I actually drove to a shopping center and sat there for a couple of hours until I thought it was safe to go back. I just sat in my car waiting. When he got back to the cabin, his roommate Tom was home and everything felt okay again. After that, he never had another experience. My mom says that when she used to go visit him there, she would park by the bridge and look over at the empty swing set. With the swings sometimes moving by themselves in the gentle breeze, she would have strong feelings of sadness and loneliness and wonder about the boys who used to live there and play there. My dad moved out of the cabin in July 1982 when he married my mom. I asked him if the cabin is still there, and he told me he drove by once not long ago to check it out, but apparently the whole area is covered in brand new houses. The cabin and the campground for boys and their mysteries are now gone. The other interesting story my mom told me about that place was that I think my dad eventually got a dog. He had a German Shepherd. I don't know if it was his or if it was his roommate Tom's, but they had a German Shepherd named Skylar that was gorgeous and a really great dog. And when my mom would go visit at night in the dark and she had to park so far away, she would be terrified to walk up, to the cabin. So she said the dog would come down and meet her at the door of her car and escort her up to the cabin when she would go visit. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're actually going to have a UFO story. I don't think we've had any UFO, alien, any type of stories like that so far for Spooky Story Tuesdays, but my aunt had a story about a flying saucer on Lotsford Vista Road, which is in Mitchellville in Prince George's County. And so there's been some talk about UFOs in the news lately too, so this is kind of fitting. All right. When it comes to my family, we either have an attraction to the paranormal that runs in our blood, or the paranormal is hopelessly attracted to us. My Aunt Patty has a vivid close encounter with a UFO as my Aunt Patty had a vivid close encounter with a UFO as a teenager in the late 1960s. She remembers her awe-inspiring experience with humor and has no fear of what may be out there. She not only wants to believe, she does. Her encounter occurred on Lotsford Vista Road, a dark, secluded country road with its own infamous reputation among folklorists, ghost hunters, and young thrill seekers. Stories extend back to the 1950s of a crybaby bridge along the road, complete with sightings of a phantom baby and mother, as well as a haunted mansion and hellish, almost supernatural twists and turns that dare nervous passengers to simply survive the road. There are also numerous stories of run-ins with the legendary Goat Man. We've met the Goat Man before. A human-like creature with the head of a goat, or the head and body of a goat, or simply a strange Bigfoot-like creature that stalks the back roads around Prince George's County, attacking people, livestock, and pets with an axe. The legend of the Goat Man is often tied into our cultural misgivings about scientific advancements. The Goat Man was allegedly born either from botched animal testing on goats or human experimentation that occurred in the nearby and equally legendary Glendale State Asylum. Setting aside myth and legend, my Aunt Patty witnessed what can almost certainly be considered the mothership of all paranormal phenomena to be experienced on this secluded road, or any road for that matter. Now, the rest of the story is in her words. This memory is very vivid, as if it happened yesterday. I will never forget this magical, monumental moment. Since this happened, I have always believed we live among other life forms and that there are planets inhabited by life forms superior to our own. I am sure if our wonderful government would see this, they would come get me and put me in a home somewhere on a deserted island. That sounds pretty good to me, actually, as long as they would provide the following: a shower, toilet, Chardonnay, a couple of horses, a garden boy to take care of the above. Anyway. It was a balmy summer night in 1966, and I was with my regular group of teenagers. Add my brother, your Uncle Tony, age 5. He was my little cherub, and I took him a lot of places with me back in the day. I was 16, my best girlfriend Susan was 18, her sister Linda was 15, my boyfriend of the summer, Bob, was 16, and Barbie, our teeny tiny little asthmatic friend who was the size of a mouse, her inhaler was bigger than her, was 14. We were in a red and white station wagon. This took place near Ardmore, Maryland, on a road we all called the Branches. Its real name was Lotsford Vista Road. This was a country road, not a lot of houses, and the ones that were there were either set back in the woods or were little tiny homes that would make one wonder, does someone really live there? It was also a dangerous road, lots of curves, densely wooded, and inhabited with motorcycle gangs like the Hells Angels and the Pagans, all of whom had made us their friends and promised to protect and take care of us if ever in danger. Boy, those were the days. This was just the place the nerdy teenagers like us found intriguing, mysterious, and fun to drive along. Ooh, there's Oscar. Whoops, wrong man. There's Oscar. We would drive down to the deepest part of the wooded road area and turn off the car lights as we drove. It would be so dark we felt invisible. Anyway, on this night, we did just that, and on our way back home from scaring the poop out of ourselves, we were turning left onto Lotsford Vista Road, and to our right was this huge red barn. We were all used to it because we were all very familiar with this road, of course. But on this night, as we turned to go left, we all looked up and saw the most amazing, gigantic, beautiful silver dome with red lights dotted around the base and white lights between the red ones. It was hovering over the barn and was as big can be. The car actually stalled. Susan could not get it to start again. We were sitting there staring at this flying saucer hovering over the barn, and Barbie, our tiny mouse friend, suddenly whipped 10 pencils out of her purse and started screaming in her asthmatic breath, "I'll save us." She started jabbing the pencils in the air, and Bob almost got stabbed in the eye, so we screamed for her to put her weapons away. We just sat there and continued to stare at the UFO as Susan desperately tried to start the car. It was scary, but at the same time, I never felt threatened. I didn't scream. I just stared in wonderment and realized I had just witnessed a real phenomenon. A surge of wow passed through my veins that night, and I will never forget it. I feel privileged to have witnessed such an amazing sight. The car finally started, and we took off. The UFO was still there. We practically flew home ourselves. Susan's parents, who were government workers, were having a party that night, and we all ran into the house, and the first words out of Tony's mouth were, because he was just 5, "We just saw a flying saucer on the dark road." Well, Susan was grounded, not because of the UFO story, as the adults simply looked at us like we were crazy, but because she was not allowed to be driving back on Lotsford Vista Road. If the adults only would have known what they had missed that night. And even though Susan was grounded, that never kept us from going back to our spot to see if our visitors had returned. We were never that lucky again, but we always felt like other eyes were watching us as we drove through the darkness of the night. Now, I have one more story to share from this book, and this was also submitted by my Uncle Bernie, who we just heard from with the haunted home in Hagerstown. And this was one of the most interesting ghostly stories that I have ever received. He sent me a couple of different stories about experiences that he's had with small beings that he referred to as gnomes. So again, I will let the story tell itself, but this is a real head scratcher. So enjoy this one. The word gnome conjures up warm and sometimes creepy images of the cheerful porcelain figurines that don red hats and kiss each other in the yards of grandparents everywhere. For those attuned to paganism and other nature-based religions, as well as Western mythologies, gnomes are described as any variety of small non-human spirits that correspond to the element of earth and are closely related to leprechauns, fairies, and elves. Together with other kinds of air, fire, and water spirits, they are called elementals. Each of these has its own popular prototype and fairy tale image in modern culture, but mythologically speaking and in paranormal terms, the lines are more blurred. Gnomes haven't always been viewed as cute little people wearing cone-shaped hats. They are historically thought of as shy underground-dwelling beings that act as protectors of their land and are powerful when provoked. Thus, the modern concept of placing gnome statues in our gardens finds its origin in the nature of these beings as guardians, watching over us and bringing good tidings to our homes and harvests. They do not like to be seen, which would explain why they are so rarely spotted. Altogether, the possibility of the existence of gnomes sounds at once very New Agey and comical, yet people have reported seeing them both in their traditional cartoonish glory and simply as small, human-like creatures. There is even a theory that gnome and elf sightings are actually falsely documented alien encounters and are more common than we think. Ghosts are easy to categorize as the spirits of people who have died. But what about beings such as gnomes that were never alive and never died and exist primarily in our modern framework of understanding only in fairy tales and as magical symbols? My Uncle Bernie documented 2 sightings of what we might call gnomes. One occurred in Pennsylvania and will be included here only as a special addition to the first one that occurred in Hagerstown. Shocked to find these among the pile of paranormal encounters he and my other contributors sent me, I felt I could make one exception, but I will let him tell the tales. And now these are his words. I was traveling west on Route 70, heading for Altoona, Pennsylvania to visit my wife Deborah sometime in the fall of 1996. There are railroad tracks all around Hagerstown, which earned its nickname the Hub, from the old coal and lumber days of the late 1800s and early 1900s. As I approached the part of Route 70 West where railroad tracks pass under the highway, I noticed something down in the knoll by the tracks. I slowed down. There was no traffic behind me. There, sitting on the knoll, was a man of childlike proportions. His head and nose were large, his body small, sitting hunched over, resting his forearms and elbows on his knees. He was dressed in childlike clothing, with long-toed slippers, tights, a long shirt with a waist belt or rope, and had a dark blue hat that reminded me of Peter Pan. I could not believe my own eyes and wished I had had a camera. His eyes seemed large and brown, yet a bit sunken due to his high cheekbones. His hands were unusually long for his size, fingers folded, yet he had large knuckles. I noticed him noticing me as he glanced to his left. Remember, my vehicle was moving very slowly at this point. I tried not to make eye contact with him. I didn't want to disturb him and, of course, didn't want to wreck my vehicle. But then it happened. Our eyes made contact, and he, the gnome, was gone in a flash, completely vanished. I could not resist. I had to stop and investigate. Upon my arrival at the knoll, I went to the exact spot he had been. I noticed patches of grass were matted down, and a few acorn shells were lying about. I shared my sighting with Deborah when I arrived in Altoona, but as you can imagine, I don't think she believed me. My next experience with such a being happened in 2006 near Sankertown outside of Altoona, Pennsylvania. I was hunting deer on the McNeil farm on Crescent Mountain with a friend. The morning was very cold, and we had a light dusting of snow. We had seen some very nice bucks during preseason scouting using this trail a lot. Around 8 a.m., I could hear something moving down the trail in the woods behind us. I was prepared to see a deer travel in range, but I was quite surprised. What appeared was a gnome, similar in all traits to the one I described in the other story. I never took my rifle off safe. I couldn't imagine shooting it. This little person got to within 15 yards of me, and he either saw me or smelled me, I don't know which. In a flash, he ran faster than any human or animal I have ever seen. He actually became a blur as he kept on the trail. I looked over at my friend, who was staring at me. "Did you hear that?" Mike asked in a low voice. "Did you see anything?" "Yes," I replied. "Not only did I hear it, but I also saw it, and you are not going to believe me when I tell you what it was." Mike had heard the approaching noise and had seen my body language as I had prepared for what may have been a nice buck. He heard the sounds getting louder and faster, but he never saw the gnome. So not only is that a really interesting, cool, different story, but since then I have heard similar stories and read similar stories. The first thing that comes to mind is a lot of, Hellier and what they've been digging up with, the Newkirks with their findings and everything. But even more so than that, I've seen some of David Politis's research and, the Missing 411 project that goes into a lot of, that goes down a lot of different rabbit holes that have to do sometimes with like aliens and UFOs, sometimes with Bigfoot. He never comes out and, states how he feels about things, but I have seen in some of his documentary footage and in some of his stories, people reporting similar encounters. And a lot of times it is hunters who are, well camouflaged, well hidden, sitting for a long time up in these trees and everything, that, when everything around them is quiet, and then they're witnessing certain bits and pieces of interesting phenomena. So I will let you all decide, of course, for yourselves. But those were some stories from my book, Maryland Ghosts, Paranormal Encounters in the Free State, available on Amazon and at Barnes & Noble and other places and whatnot. Signed copies from yours truly. And then I have one more story to share with you. Good. And then we're making good time. This is going to come to us from Possessed Possessions by Ed Okonowitz, who's a great, great, great Maryland folklorist. I got this book when I was in high school from an antique store in Havre de Grace, Maryland. Beautiful Havre de Grace on the Chesapeake Bay. There was the coolest antique store, and it had this gorgeous sleigh in like, it was like on a shelf. It was gigantic, but it was like placed on a rack, and it was for sale. And I remember being fascinated by it. And I remember buying like this book of ghost stories there. And the owner of the store was telling us that the store was actually haunted, and that the sleigh itself was supposed to have been haunted, and that people would see apparitions sometimes around the sleigh or in conjunction with the sleigh. And so this story, I believe, has to do with a sleigh. I think it's actually the sleigh that is there in the store. And the story is called Jonathan's Special Chair. It reminds me of my Jonathan too. So anyway, let's get to it. Jonathan was excited about his trip. Even though the end of November was not the best time of the year to be traveling, and even if it was a long, lonely drive to Western Maryland, he had decided that the trip was definitely going to be worth it. The Portland cutter sleigh that he was planning to buy was exactly what he had been seeking. He could tell from the picture he had received in the mail. There were also some other pieces that he was interested in securing for his store. His sources were a few pickers, people who aren't full-time dealers but who buy interesting things now and then and sell them on the side. Jonathan had found some unusual items using this avenue in the past. He promised Victoria, his wife, that the old wooden antique sleigh would dress up the shop window for Christmas. Plus, when they sold it, the profit would be well worth the time and effort he had spent on the trip. His destination was a small homestead past Cumberland, almost near the Pennsylvania-West Virginia border. He stopped several times along the route, made what he considered to be a few smart deals, and arrived at the old farmhouse to pick up the sleigh on schedule. He was delighted that he was also able to purchase a handsome hand-carved chair. Jonathan completed his business, loaded his van, and attached a U-Haul trailer, and headed home. He had been gone for 4 days and arrived back at his antique shop on the western shore of Maryland in the middle of the morning. Immediately, he called a friend to help him unload. The two men tried to get the sleigh into the store, but it wouldn't fit through the main door. They decided to store it elsewhere, but that meant it was not going to be the focus of the corner window Christmas display. Instead, Jonathan filled the store window with the special chair. He and Victoria added some seasonal decorations, and they agreed it filled the space quite nicely. I remember this chair too. This is so great. Okay. After the holidays, the unusual chair remained a major item of the store's inventory. It had arrived at the end of November and sat for nearly 3 months in the window. Jonathan recalled his reaction when he first saw the piece in the front room of the old Cumberland farmhouse. It immediately interested me, he said. From my first touch, I found it was enchanting and troubling. To be honest, he added, it scared the hell out of me. But I bought it because I was greedy about wanting something so intricately carved. It was ornate and grotesque at the same time. He estimated that the chair had been made in Germany about 1880 and was shipped to the U.S. from Berlin in 1903. The shipping tag was still attached to the underside of the seat. It was large, thick, and sturdy, and a very dark walnut color. Surprisingly, it was light in weight like poplar wood and not very dense. It was assembled from 2 pieces and easily dismantled and transportable. Perhaps its most striking features were the ornate carvings covering most of its surfaces. The back of the chair featured the carved head of a gremlin or a dwarf that projected about 2.5 inches from the flat surface. There was a figure with the head of a bird, with the facial expression set in a wicked sneer, and it had a woman's breast and a man's ribs. The top corner carvings featured the heads of flying dogs, and the feet were covered with fish heads with snail-like bodies and tails that turned into spiders. On the seat was a circle with a compass-like design. I didn't understand the significance of the chair, said John, reflecting back. I was taken with it, attracted to it because it was so ornate, and I thought it would be good for the store by attracting attention and customers. But I also was a bit wary because it was so grotesquely carved, and I was overcome by its unusualness. In February, Victoria had a contact from her friend in Louisiana. He was a psychic who had not been told anything about the chair. He called me, Victoria said. He had visualized about the chair and told me more about it than I could have told him. He was concerned about it being in the store. I remember his exact words were, "Get rid of it." A bit bothered, Jonathan moved the chair out of the window and into the store, put a $1,400 price ticket on it, and placed a number of books on top of it. About mid-March, business picked up and people started coming in, frequently inquiring about the chair. There was one nice couple, Jonathan said. I watched them as they approached the chair. They acted extremely careful, moved slowly, checking for faults and cracks all over. They handled the chair as if it was something sacred, reverently, the same way we might react if we had walked into a room and saw a crucifix and the other people didn't know what it was. His curiosity aroused, Jonathan asked the examiners if they could share anything about the chair. They said they weren't quite sure, but they thought it might be a high priestess chair. They asked to move it to the center of the store. They went over it like it was an archaeological object. Apparently, the people were seeking runes, the name for mystical symbols or markings that would help them determine the object's use. They said the carved face was probably the Green Man, the god of nature in German mythology. The winged figures at the top edges of the chair were protectors or guardians. They pointed to the seat that had a circular movable area that could be twisted or oriented in the direction of north, south, east, and west to the four winds, they said. Well, it says more connections to Hellier. Interesting. I was fascinated by the logic of their explanations, Jonathan said. They explained that the chair was made of low-density wood and able to be dismantled into two sections to make it more easily portable so it could be carried from place to place. They told me they practice white witchcraft, not casting evil spells, but being one with nature and using the positive forces that nature could provide. They were from northern Pennsylvania in their 40s and well-educated professionals. I got the impression they were very interested in buying the chair. But they also said that the seat was filled with some sort of energy field. Before they left, they pointed out other things associated with Wicca that I was ignorant of. In fact, they purchased a set of cufflinks that had been made in Salem, Massachusetts, and that bore the Wicca pentagram. They never returned, but in April, a man came in looking for books on witchcraft, and he noticed the chair. He went out to his car, came back in, and asked if he could have a closer look. With permission, he laid out 5 tarot cards on the seat and began to examine their significance. You have to understand, Jonathan said, this was all brand new to a very conservative person. I was raised a Roman Catholic and had heard ghost stories, but I never experienced anything like this. This man, too, began looking for runes. He explained that a person who practices white, the good and positive side of witchcraft, wants nothing to do with the dark side, and he didn't want to purchase an evil piece of furniture. From the lack of certain markings and from the positive readings he received from his cards, the man determined the furniture was not dark or sinister. More new people came into the store, many giving Jonathan information about this chair. Some told him the dog carvings on the top wings were guardians. Others said the scowling faces were meant to scare off intruders. The scratching and rough marks symbolized defense. Soon afterwards, a young lady with a child came in, and they moved directly to the chair, Jonathan said. The mother put her arm over the seat of the chair, and the hair on her arm stood up on end. Now the chair was solid wood. There were no metal nails or pins in it. I went over and did it too, and my hair stood up on end. It was right above the seated base, and it only happens sometimes, not always. I was starting to gain enough knowledge and see enough happening with the chair to be uncomfortable, Jonathan said. About this time, Victoria had absorbed more than her fill of the haunted chair, as she called it. I hated it, she said without hesitation. I didn't like it from the first day he brought it to the shop because it was dark and demonic. Most of all, I was afraid he was going to bring it home. We also were concerned for our kids, Jonathan admitted. We thought we could deal with whatever might happen, but we didn't want to put our children in harm's way. We also didn't want anyone who might specifically be interested in the chair coming to the house to see it. We wanted to keep our private life out of this whole situation. Victoria got another telephone call from her psychic friend in Louisiana. When she told him what had occurred, he opened up and told her the piece of furniture was not to be feared as much as those persons it would bring into the store. He explained that the people coming, said Victoria, were interested in using it for evil purposes, and because we happened to have it, we could be in a dangerous situation. In an effort to sell the chair more quickly, Jonathan put it back in the window. Suddenly, things started happening in the store. We were having all sorts of new customers come in constantly, Jonathan said, but no one would buy a thing. Nothing at all. There were 80, 100 people in on a weekend. They would say, "Oh, we just love your store," and then leave. We got lots of compliments. It was driving us crazy. Another friend came by. She had not been in the store for months, and as she was leaving, Jonathan casually mentioned the high priestess chair in the window. She stopped dead and said she had a very bad feeling, and she would consult some of her Wicca friends and get back with any information she could secure. Within days, Jonathan got instructions to take the chair out of the window immediately. His friend said the piece was a protectorate. It was specifically designed and built to protect its owner. But because it was not protecting anyone, because no one was sitting in the chair, it was protecting everything in the store, Jonathan said, and not letting anything leave. I was told to take it out of the window and put it alone in a corner and give it a book to read, something nature-related or some poetry, by placing it on the seat of the chair. To have some fun, I put a copy of Stephen King's The Stand on the chair seat. But when my friend called and I told her what I had done, she ordered me to remove it immediately. She also sent me some incense sticks to burn to cleanse the store. When we opened the next week, the first 10 people who came in bought something. We had people waiting in line to check out. Victoria and I were laughing. We were so relieved. The friend from Louisiana called and told Victoria the chair would be sold soon. But he stressed that she and Jonathan must sell it only to the people who knew that the chair was to be used for a specific purpose, and that she and Jonathan were to receive some special sign before they made this deal. Then he explained that the chair was a protector for travelers who used astral projection and expend energy to allow one spirit to leave the body and go from one site to another. However, the body is in a vulnerable state and subject to attack or injury during that time. The chair, with its energy and threatening carvings, protects the human body that has been left behind until the spirit force returns. The chair's purpose, said Jonathan, was to protect the person who sat there while the spirit was traveling. That's also why it was important it could be broken down and taken to different sites for gatherings and meetings. In July, Victoria had a bothersome dream that the store had been ransacked. There were strange people clad in white robes with greyhounds on leashes, shouting they were there to take out the light. It was all so frightening and real. One red-headed woman in particular played a significant role in Victoria's dream. That same day, Jonathan awoke later than usual and was late for work. When he arrived at the shop, there was a message from a friend that people were coming that evening after hours to see the chair. Remembering that his Louisiana friend had said the buyers would come and would know what the chair is to be used for, Jonathan arrived at 7 o'clock and began polishing the piece of furniture that had changed his life so dramatically. At 7:15, 2 men and a woman walked through the door. But for some reason, Jonathan did not get the impression that these were the people that he was expecting. They walked around, looking at nothing in particular. I remember the one man. He seemed very quiet. Put his hands on the back of the chair, said Jonathan. He said he was getting images. He said, I see a men's group in a tavern, like a Knights of Columbus or some fraternal organization, maybe Masons. They are gathered around. They know it is magical, but they don't know how to activate it. I see a second family years later using the chair for petty things. They were trying to get their next-door neighbor to sell them a cow, and they tried to influence others to do trivial things. These were far beneath the piece's level or capabilities. It's not what it was designed for. Later, the chair sat idle for 40 years. I asked this gentleman the purpose of the chair, and he told me that he got the strong vision that it was a chariot used for traveling. Finally, I was relieved, for I had someone who knew what it was for. No one else ever knew. Jonathan asked the man if the chair could help with one's search for knowledge or spiritual growth. The man answered yes. Then, as if enchanted with the possibilities of the power associated with the chair, voices in the back of Jonathan's mind started telling him to keep the chair. The man approached him and asked, Are you going to sell it to us? Jonathan replied without hesitation, If I were going to sell it to anyone, it would be you, because I know you know what it's for, but I don't want to sell it. As he completed the sentence, everything became dead quiet. Every sound ceased, the fans, electric current, all humming. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound out of the air. I took that as a sign the chair wanted to go, Jonathan said. I also was afraid that the chair, and its reaction to my desire to keep it, had put me in a dangerous situation. As I reflect on all of these strange things that happened during those months, I'm amazed at how much I learned and about how much I still don't know. Things I had never imagined are now part of my life. I was the guardian of the chair, and I didn't want it stolen, damaged, or destroyed. I also admit that I toyed with keeping it, but I didn't know how to deal with its powers. Perhaps those people did. If I didn't sell it to them, they probably could have gotten it somehow. They were powerful enough in their own way. I think the chair came to us to be protected for a period of time, said Jonathan, and we were to bring the chair to where it could be found and eventually put to use. We were just the intermediaries. When I went out to buy the sleigh, I believed that it had enough energy to tell those people to sell it to me. So, Jonathan said, almost sadly, recalling the circumstances, I made the sensible decision and told the man I would sell it to him. 2 days after their first visit, when the buyers came back into the store, Jonathan said they carried his chair away so very carefully. They almost treated it with reverence, he said. In a way, I was relieved, but I also remember feeling like the light was going out, like the phrase that people were shouting in my wife's dream. Interestingly, there was another woman with them who wasn't there the night they came in to buy the chair. She had bright red hair, just like in Victoria's dream. I never took a picture of the chair. I didn't have to. I will remember what it looks like forever. I also never inquired what they were going to do with the chair. I guess I really didn't want to know all those details at the time. Now sometimes I wonder who they were, how they found us, and where they are now. Jonathan said he has a better understanding of how pieces can be affected by the experiences of life, and he is more cautious now. Although the chair brought us great knowledge, he said, we were out of our depth. While we learned a tremendous amount about that fantastic other world out there, we were also very vulnerable. Now that it's gone, I believe those people were meant to see it. It would draw certain people toward it, and you either liked it or hated it. Some people would walk past it, out in the open, and never know it existed. Others could find it if it was hidden behind a stack of books. It was almost like it was protecting itself and drawing energy off certain people who would pass. 3 weeks after the chair left the store, Jonathan said a woman came in and began speaking about a friend of hers who had experienced a long string of bad luck. She said her friend had lost everything, her job, family, but no matter what happened, no matter what she had to do, to sell, to work at, to survive, that woman swore she would not give up her one prized possession, her hand-carved chair. Jonathan asked what it looked like. The customer described a chair identical to the one Jonathan had sold. When she drew it on a sheet of paper, he said, I got a chill. It was a mate to the one we had, and somehow, now, somewhere, there are two of them, and they are both still out there. That is from the book Possessed Possessions. And I just love that story, and I loved that sleigh, and I loved that antique store in Havre de Grace that I really hope is still there. And if anybody knows if it's still there, please let me know, because that would be very good news to hear. So that concludes tonight's lineup of stories about family and nostalgia. And I do want to remind you that tomorrow you can tune into facebook.com/what's your ghost story to hear Scott Marcus's tales and ghost stories. And then Friday, facebook.com/haunted Galena. Of course, they will tell some stories as well, and I highly recommend both of those sessions. And then right now, which I am stealing your time from, on YouTube, the Adler Planetarium is having its 90th anniversary celebration virtually on the Science Fridays YouTube channel, and that's the Astro Artist Club and virtual observing event. And I just remembered now from looking at my screen that I had one more thing to share with you from my uncle, and it was just a piece of a letter that he sent me. Just 3 paragraphs, and it's fitting for our session, and it's fitting for just the believing in the magic and the mysteries of life. This was dated July 16th, 2012. Amelia, I truly believe that you and I have developed a sixth sense and acceptability to the unknown that is above normal. Remember, I am your haunted uncle. Ha! I feel we will continue to have paranormal experiences. In a way, I feel the other side is at ease, comfortable with revealing its wonders to people like us. Deborah and I continue to have experiences here at our home, such as voices, footsteps, and returning home to find lights, ceiling fans, and other items turned on or moved about. I hope and believe that in the future, people will have a new awareness of how to live alongside nature as well as the supernatural. I simply try in my own humble way to make a difference each day. Whatever happens, let's continue to live lives we truly love and enjoy and accept every blessing and miracle bestowed upon us, leaving a footprint of good on this planet. We must respect and appreciate each other and never forget that in creation there are and will always be other dimensions that some of us, the fortunate few, are privileged to experience. So I want to thank you for joining me. And next week, I think I will continue kind of on this theme of family, and I'll pivot towards my personal experiences, and I'll share some of those stories with you. And Sunshine, the ball python, will be our special guest. Do remember to bring your questions about the snakes too, if you have any. And thank you so much. And I will see you again next Tuesday. Bye, everybody.